Hello, hockey fans, and welcome to McKeen's Hockey on YouTube. On today's episode, we're going to have a discussion about the top 10 picks of the 2024 NHL Draft class. The early rankings are out, so go check that out at the website www.mckeenshockey.com. And can you please subscribe and hit that like button to help the channel grow? We'd really appreciate that. All right, on this episode, we are going to be talking with Brock Otten, the Director of Scouting for McKeen's, Derek Newmeyer, the Assistant Director of Scouting, and Josh Bell, the Video Scouting Coordinator. So let me introduce Brock, Derek, and Josh to the new McKeen's podcast. Welcome to the show, boys.
Yeah, this is exciting.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, they're gonna discuss the rankings and what it took to come down to the top 64 right now. And so, without further ado, gentlemen, have at it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. This is sort of our first run at this as a McKeen's team, and we felt that it was natural for the first one to be about our newly released top 64, and just kind of give everybody an opportunity to understand how we put our list together. We did give all of our scouts an opportunity to grade the players in their region that they felt were candidates for the top 64 this time around. Then we put that list together and came up with a top 64 that we were pretty comfortable with as a team. We wanted to get this list out before the World Juniors. Then after the World Juniors, maybe towards the end of January, we're going to expand this list to a top 100. I think the most natural place to start here, and we were fairly unanimous as a group that Macklin Celebrini was the number one player available. Is the number one player available? I personally don't know if that's going to change this year. It looks like he's got that pretty locked up. Why do you guys think that Macklin Celebrini is that sort of unanimous number one right now?
Well, I would say that he's just such a complete, polished player. I mean, he's so responsible on every inch of the ice. He's a great two-way player. Like, he understands how to generate offense. He understands his responsibilities defensively. I'd say he's a guy who leans more offensive than defensive overall, but I don't think he's ever going to be someone that cheats defensively or, is a liability in that regard. And it's just so rare to see players who can generate this kind of offense at the NCAA level at his age. I mean, he's still 17. He's got 25 points in 15 games playing for Boston University, which is pretty remarkable. He's just so advanced in the way he thinks the game, the way he prepares himself. And there's not really anyone nipping at his heels, which in some ways kind of puts him at the number one spot by default.
I think it's natural now to talk about the players that we have ranked right behind Celebrini. And this is where things got very interesting for us. We as a staff had trouble ranking these players. We had a very clear idea of the players that we wanted to rank 2 through 8. We do feel like there is a very separate tier here. Right now, we did feel like there was a very solid group here, 2 through 8. It was just finding that consensus on where those players should slot in. So for reference point, we have Sam Dickinson at number 2, Cayden Lindstrom at 3, Konsta Helenius at 4, Cole Eiserman at 5, Anton Silayev at 6, Ivan Demidov at 7, and Artyom Levshunov at 8. I mean, first, I guess it makes sense to ask you guys about these defensemen. Derek, where are you on these 3 defensemen? I know that you're probably a lot higher on Anton Silayev than some other people in our on our scouting team.
Yeah, I would say I'm pretty close on all 3. Right now, I would feel comfortable having Dickinson a little higher. Personally, I might have him a tier above both Levshunov and Silayev, although I will admit they're all very, very close, and I think the order that I have them in could certainly switch around throughout the season. With Dickinson, I just find him to be the most well-rounded out of the 3. I love the mobility of his skating. I love the fluidity of his puck movements. There are some question marks about his decision-making and his awareness at times. I find his consistency can really wane, but he's also playing for the London Knights. And, you have to give a lot of credit to their track record. You have to kind of factor that into the equation a little bit. Levshunov has a lot of power to his game, really great north-south Sometimes I find him a little clunky in his movements and the things he tries to do. It's certainly getting better, but sometimes I wonder, is it a skill issue? Is it just him, being so much bigger and stronger than a lot of guys that he can kind of just power through? Is that how he's gonna try to do things? I don't know. I feel pretty confident in all three guys, but I feel pretty confident in their overall upside to put them near the top of our draft list.
Yeah, and Josh, I think you raised a really good point in some of our discussions about these rankings that I think we need to look at some of the errors that Silayev is making and remember that when we're comparing him to these other two defensemen, he's playing against grown men that have a ton of pro experience, and that has to be weighted appropriately, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to say. His development curve has been rushed more than these other two guys have been. So he's in the KHL right now, and what he's doing is just unheard of. It's ridiculous, to be honest. He's already broken the U18 record for a defenseman in the league, which I think was only 3 or 4 points. And now he has tied the overall U18 record and the U19 record for a defender. When we look at just how he's kind of risen up and how he's impressed, I think that does need to be a consideration when we look at ranking him. And I think looking at all three of these guys, the decision making and the processing is probably I would argue the biggest issue for all three. And Silayev, I think there's just so much potential there. Like Derek said, that package that he brings, it's almost unheard of. And so I think it's pretty exciting what he's doing in the KHL right now. He's kind of stalled a little bit in recent games in terms of that offensive, but it's nothing to worry about. I think even if he were to get no points for the rest of the year, the fact that he's playing significant minutes in that league, and that he is impacting the ice at both ends is nothing to scoff at. So it's an impressive season that he's having so far.
Yeah, and I mean, once we get past those three defensemen, there's a group of solid forwards, and I think it makes sense to talk about Helenius next because I know you and Derek are kind of, I'm not going to say on opposite ends of the spectrum here, but that was one guy that does seem to be creating a bit of polarization at this point of the year in terms of his upside. Josh, you want to go first in talking about why you really like Helenius?
Yeah, for sure. So for me personally, I think he might be my favorite in the top 10. I do have him personally at second overall, just ahead of Dickinson. But all season, I think he's been outplaying his production. Looking at his stats, you're not really impressed, but he is owed more than that stat line shows. He's consistently making plays. And what I think is most impressive, similar to Silayev, is that he's playing in the Liga. He's playing in the top men's league in Finland. And he's the youngest player on the team. And everywhere he plays, he's always been the youngest player on the team. And he consistently excels to be a star on that team.
And I think that kind of is a natural segue to talking about the other two players within our 2 through 8, and that's Cole Eiserman and Ivan Demidov. And Demidov, obviously tons of skill, has had some injury issues this year, obviously not playing a ton in the KHL, so there is that component that makes it tough to evaluate him. In terms of Cole Eiserman is a guy that I'm finding myself having a hard time really loving this year, and I'll tell you why. I really liked his play last year, and I just don't know if I've seen any sort of improvement. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because Cole Eiserman was already a fantastic prospect last year, playing up with the U18s. But I'm having a hard time really loving Eiserman this year the way that I did last year, and it's making it sort of difficult for me to find a spot within our rankings in terms of where I would want him. And speaking of bumping, I thought we would leave this player to the end for our discussion of our players ranked 2 through 8. It's Cayden Lindstrom. Obviously, he's a player who has risen significantly up, not just our rankings, but a lot of rankings across the different independent scouting agencies. Why? Obviously, he's in your region, Derek. Why is Lindstrom a player that is just so alluring?
Man, his trajectory this season has been phenomenal. And actually last season too. So Lindstrom wasn't a first round pick in his Bantam draft year. He also wasn't even a second round pick. Medicine Hat actually got him in the third round, which is kind of amazing. But this is a guy who just has so much upside in all areas. He's a phenomenal athlete, a really big player, and he's just got tons of skill. Like when you watch him play, he just leaves such a tremendous impact on the game in so many different areas. He's a sublime skater, fantastic puck skill, a real physical presence who's not afraid to throw thunderous hits and, get his hands dirty. Like he doesn't back away from challenges. He'll wipe you out on the boards. He'll fight to get inside position around the net, but he's also got a ton of skill. And his vision and his awareness and his decision-making are all coming along really, really nicely as well. He's not just a guy who kind of tries to power forward and do everything himself. Like he's a guy who really does understand the play unfolding around him. He's able to make smart, subtle plays. But don't get me wrong, this is a guy who could potentially really cement himself as the number 2 prospect in this draft if he continues to play and develop at the pace that he has so far this season.
I guess the next thing we wanted to sort of do is we wanted to talk about a little bit more of a rapid fire sort of format. Some players outside of our top 10 and players sort of on the fringes of our list, and just allow people to become a little bit more aware of our opinions on certain players. So first thing we want to talk about was some players that are not currently in our top 10, but we personally believe have an opportunity to sort of move up into that territory in the future. And I'll go first with Zeev Buium. I've been very impressed with his play at both ends. Obviously, he's producing a lot offensively as a freshman defender, right up there with Levshunov. The skating combination with the IQ is really good in my opinion, and I think that's led to a lot of really positive defensive plays. I do see some of the concern, and I'll let Derek sort of speak to that. I do see some of the concern about a lack of, maybe we'll call it, premium athletic tools. We've seen a lot of defenders with a similar sort of skill set have difficulty transitioning to the NHL level. And I know one guy that Derek brought up in our discussion was Ty Smith, and I do see some of that concern, but I just see Buium being such an intelligent player. I think that he can get the most out of that skill set.
Yeah, he's another player that, like Helenius, I do like overall. It's just I might not like him or maybe believe in him quite as much as I do some of the other players in this draft class. I think this draft class does start to cluster a little bit in the 10 to 20 range. There are a handful of guys in there that I do like a lot, and I'm starting to grow on.
Okay, so why don't we talk about your pick in this section, and that's Carter Yakemchuk. Why is he sort of your favorite, just knocking on that door of the top 10?
Yakemchuk is a wild ride, let me tell you. Like the Calgary Hitmen are not a particularly good team, and they haven't been since Yakemchuk came into the league. They really opened the door for someone on that team to step up and say, I'm going to lead this team. I'm going to be the guy. And Yakemchuk just burst through the door. He is about 6'2", 6'3", a right shot defenseman, and really, really good puck skill. Like his offensive sense and his ability to drive play are really remarkable. And it just seems like it kind of came out of nowhere. He's another guy who wasn't necessarily a high a Bantam pick. I think he was a third rounder. But just the growth he's been able to accomplish in the opportunity he's had is remarkable. He's just a guy where it almost seems like at times with the Hitmen, their whole strategy is just give Yakemchuk the puck and let him do his thing. And somehow it just keeps working. He's scoring at more than a point per game pace. And just the way he's able to create offense for himself and his team from the blue line in is pretty incredible. Like he's a legitimately high-end threat from the blue line in. He's a legitimately high-end threat as a power play quarterback. He can pass, he can shoot. He brings a pretty good physical element as well. He's not a bad skater. I wouldn't say he's a great skater, but he's certainly good enough. And he's able to weave through traffic. He's able to create a little bit of separation in a straight line. Like, he's a really special player. And I think a lot of teams are starting to realize just how rare he is for what he can bring and what he's doing.
Josh, why don't you take us through your player that's your favorite knocking on the door of the top 10?
Yeah, this was tough. There's a few guys in that range that I like, but I ultimately went with Emil Hemming, playing for TPS in the Liga this year. So I think he started off the year with a strong performance at the Hlinka Gretzky, 9 points in the 5 games, and he really hasn't looked back. I almost see him as a Cayden Lindstrom 2.0. He's a little bit smaller. The ceiling maybe isn't as high, but I don't think it's that far off. I think his combination of size and skill is going to put him high on NHL teams' lists. He's fearless in his drive to the net. His eagerness on the forecheck, he's nonstop. I can just imagine how hard he is to play against. He has a really strong, powerful shot that he's got 2 of his goals came in the last 3 Liga games. So he's consistently playing above his age class. He looks more mature. He's still just 17. So there's a lot to like here. I think he is knocking on the door. He's maybe doesn't have that ceiling that some of those guys in the 2 to 8 range that we talked about, but in the 9-10, I think he could get some conversation there from our scouts later this year.
That pretty much brings it to an end for us today. We wanted to just give you guys a little bit of a snippet on how our rankings came together and some of our opinions on the players eligible this year. This is going to kind of be a semi-regular thing now moving forward, that we have our own YouTube channel and kind of give everybody a peek through the window of the McKeen's thought process. And I really want to thank everybody for joining us. And but yeah, thanks for following along, and until next time.
Thanks, guys, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe, hit that like button, help the channel grow. We'd really appreciate that, and we'll see you soon. Cheers.